What's going on, everybody? Gentleman94 here. Welcome back to Ben Builds. This is episode 4 here on the Spiffy Tiffy Buddy Build, and we are going to be working on getting this fuselage together. So we're going to install the cockpit tub into the sides of the fuselage, get the fuselage buttoned up, and then we're going to see where we go from there. So first things, let me go ahead and pull out the fuselage sides. They are ready to go. We don't have to do too much work on that, and we are going to probably need to do a few extra touch-up things here, just to be on the safe side before we button this whole thing up. So let me just check this real quick. Last episode we worked on the wings and we got those glued together. They are looking pretty decent. I do have to do some cleanup here on the leading edges of the wings, but other than that, these are looking pretty good. Don't have to do too much with those. We do have to install into the chin of the Typhoon, we have to install this oil cooler, and that's going to go up on inside. We'll get that when we get the cockpit in there. But everything else in the cockpit on the sidewalls are on and done. So that's that. Now we're going to have to do a little bit of work right here. Let's dry fit this cockpit tub though into the fuselage. Last time I did this, we were noticing that the locating pins just didn't fit very snugly. So I wanted to go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup here on the cockpit tub. Let's go ahead and use our X-Acto knife and hollow out some of the locating pin holes here to make sure that it really fits up well into the cockpit, and then we'll see where we stand. All right, so using my X-Acto knife here, I'm just going to hollow out 2 of the locating pins on the front. Now, these are supposed to fit on the tiny little nubs here coming out of the side of the fuselage on either side, and I don't think they fit very well, so I want to make sure that there's no mistake that these should be able to fit in just fine. A couple of swipes with the hobby knife should be decent enough, just to kind of get this thing cleaned up and ready for installation. I like how this cockpit turned out. I'm actually very pleased about this. All right, so let's dry fit this cockpit in here and see how it looks. Now there's a locating pin on the back and on the front, and there's also corresponding locating holes here on the tubing that runs around and frames in the actual cockpit. So we're going to be just making sure this all fits together. We have good contact on those points because that's all there is to glue this thing in. So you really want to make sure that fits in. Okay, it looks pretty decent. Before we do that though, I do want to paint this bottom section here on the cockpit. I want to paint this a black. Now no one's really going to see it, but I want to make sure that if someone does look in there, they don't notice it. So we're taking a little bit of this flat black paint and we're just going to kind of slosh it around on the inside here, because I don't want this to be, sticking out like a sore thumb when I button this whole thing up and I can't get in there to paint. I guess I could stick an airbrush nozzle in there and shoot it that way, but I would risk getting paint everywhere. Just a quick brush will be fine. Okay, so the cockpit fits up nicely into the fuselage. The locating pins are nice and clean, and they fit into the sidewall tubing just fine. So this should be all we need to do. Let's go ahead and grab some Tamiya extra thin, drop some on those locating pins, and we should have a cockpit installed in half of the fuselage. So this is looking all right. We're excited. Let's go ahead and get this glued in here and move on to the next section. Okay, so the cockpit is nicely glued in there. I'm going to go ahead and glue the front oil cooler in now. And that should be basically all we need to glue on this side of the fuselage. Then we're going to have to dry fit the other side. Now that could be the difficult part. We'll have to see how it all lines up. But I'm going to drop a little bit of the extra thin here on the bottom of the oil cooler and on the side as well. And that should be decent enough. Okay, let's let that dry. And then we're going to come back and we're going to dry fit the fuselage side, see how that fits. Okay, let's go ahead and test this fuselage to see how this goes. All right, the tail fits together nicely, but the fuselage is not lining up with the correct locating holes. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of work probably on this. So yeah, this is going to be trouble. Okay, so it looks like what's really kind of keeping this together was a little bit of meat left on the instrument panel. I went ahead and sanded that down and we were able to fit this much, much better. We may need to take a little bit more off though, just to be on the safe side. Also, the inner locating pins are not lining up very well. So that's probably just a problem with my initial installation and assembly of the cockpit. It's probably my bad, but I should be able to fix it just by maneuvering it around and dropping some glue on it and holding it together. It should be fine. So we're going to just move and get all of these locating pins attached. We'll get this glued. Once that dries, we'll be able to come back and start filling in some of the openings up the top with some strips of styrene. So a lot of work to do. So you can see there's a large gap there. So yeah, Just doesn't fit as nice as I was hoping it to. But that's okay. We'll roll with it. We'll get it fixed up. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of plastic here off of the instrument panel. We took a little bit off the first time. We'll take a little bit more off here just to make sure that the cowling can button up and we can glue it closed. It's not a bad fit. It's just a bit wonky because there's only these tiny little locating pins. They don't fit together very easily. So we just got to make do and see what we can get away with. Okay, that actually fits much better up front. So we will still have to fill those gaps there. Those inserts that Hasegawa has given us to go ahead and, make different versions out of this one particular mold is not helping anybody. They are not easy to go ahead and fit. We have to do a lot of filling for that. But that's okay. I have a plan though. We're going to use some strips of styrene, cut those down, and get those all together. All right, guys, so we need to go ahead and fill up some of these gaps here. We need to put some styrene in there. I've glued the fuselage together using some extra thin cement, and basically we are looking decent. Now, I'm going to use these strips of styrene here. I'm going to cut them down and fit them between the fuselage halves, just in those certain areas, because I don't want to have to try to fill it. And if I fill it, it may crack, using like putty or something like that. So instead, I think this way I can fill up those gaps, and then I can come back with some super glue and cover up, and the seam should be easy enough to get rid of. All right, now the back one, actually, we have a little bit of an issue here because there's this, I don't want to call it a headrest, but there's something here that needs to be removed. So we're going to put some styrene in there, and then when we slice it off, we're going to lose this whole area. Okay, so let's go ahead and fit the styrene in here first. Once we fit the styrene into the crack, we can then come back later after it's dry and we can slice the entire section off. There's that one little area we have to be concerned with, but I'm just going to cut it off because there's a photo etched piece that actually replaces that. It's not even a headrest. I don't really know what that is. Maybe it's for the aerial. Maybe it's for some sort of a radio set or something. I don't know what that is really. But we're going to trim down this piece of styrene and get it ready, and then we're going to glue it into the fuselage. And then we're going to let that dry, and then we'll come back and we'll clean it up, slice all the extra styrene away, and then we'll have a nice section that we can sand down, cover with super glue if we need to go ahead and make anything disappear, let that dry, and then we'll be back in business. Next episode, we'll most likely get some of the finer points, sanded and rescribed, because we're going to lose some surface detail when we start getting all this together. Now we'll put some of the plastic welder glue here onto that, and that should help to bond all of this area and really make it an integral one piece. That should be fine. I love this plastic welding stuff. It's so great. All right, everybody. And while the styrene is drying here with the glue, we're going to take our super glue and come in here and fill in this area right in here. Now, when you put the inserts in the fuselage, there is inevitably either a giant gap or a giant step. It's a common complaint with a lot of these kits that have those inserts to change different versions. We need to take some super glue and fill in this whole area here and let that dry. Once it dries, it'll harden, and we can then take our sanding pads and our jeweler files, come back and finish them all off and then polish it out. So we shouldn't actually see any of the seam lines. So the glue is dry. I'm going to go ahead and use my flush cuts, and we're going to cut off some of this plastic. A little bit of plastic will remain above the actual fuselage inserts. That's okay. I'll take my sanding files and we'll file it down eventually. But this whole area has to be completely cleaned off, which means this strange pseudo headrest has to come off as well. So I've removed all this area, and I'm taking my jeweler files and we're sanding down all the imperfections. My hobby knife, we can use that to slice some of this plastic off and really get this flush and clean. I'll probably come back with some super glue, cover it up, and let that dry as well. But for now, this is pretty decent. So while the fuselage is drying and all that super glue cures, I wanted to turn my attention to the wings, and I've been cleaning up certain of the edges and all that, and we're looking decent on it. But I have a question for all y'all. There's this bomb rack that fits onto the wing. You see the locating pins here and at the bottom. But if you notice, there's a plastic tab that sticks out that covers the shell ejection port. I'm kind of curious if that's actually supposed to do that. I don't know. I don't have any references on the Tiffy, and I don't really know much about the Tiffy, so I'm not sure if this is correct. I'm assuming it's correct because it's from Edward, and they do pretty decent work, and Hasegawa, they did decent work as well, so I'm not sure if this is supposed to be like that or if I should remove it. So if any of you know why exactly this is like this, please by all means let me know, and I will either remove it or I'll keep it, depending on what everyone says. I don't really know what to do with it. All right, guys, let's go ahead and dry fit the wings to the fuselage joint just to check that out. The fuselage is more or less, looking good. I don't see any problems with this. It fits so nicely together. There's a little bit of a gap here between wing root and the fuselage, That's okay. I'm not too concerned about that. We'll have to go ahead and kind of play around with that a little bit once we get the, wings glued in. We should be able to use some plastic welder, which should take care of any gaps, anything like that. I don't know if these wings are supposed to droop a bit in the center. They seem like they angle down a bit coming off the fuselage and then they pitch up. I don't know if that center section should be level or if it's okay to let it droop a bit. I gotta look back at my references and see if that's something that the Tiffy does. I don't really know. Like I said, I don't know much about the Typhoon. So next episode, the glue will be dry and we'll come back and we'll start filing off all of the super glue. That should allow us to have a nice invisible seam. We should be able to start priming and painting after that point. And I'm super excited to see how this actually is going to look once it's all covered in paint, glued together, and we are in business. So guys, thank you so much for watching episode 4. Tune in next week for episode 5, and we will continue on the Tiffy. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you soon.